if I turn that off, and if I import a file, all of these turn into pure mesh objects. They're mesh representations. Now, in the IFC file, it doesn't always store your geometry as meshes. You can if you want, and that's what Blender does by default when it exports, but you don't need to. And that's why I was losing files, because I had a problem with this native feature that I'm building right now. If you go and, so internally in the IFC file, this object might actually be represented by an extrusion. So a parametric extrusion, which has a profile and an extrusion depth. However, under the default settings, if you do a simple import, it will lose that information. And if you're just viewing an IFC file, that doesn't matter. If you're just editing portions of an IFC file, that also doesn't matter. If you're just editing the properties of an IFC file, that doesn't matter. But when it comes to editing the geometry of an IFC file, it does matter, because other programs, such as Revit or ArchiCAD, will treat parametric geometry different from a mesh geometry. So, for example, you might know that Revit has no tools to edit mesh geometry the same way you can edit it in Blender. I can't just do this in Revit. It's not possible. As a result, if I export this as a mesh, the user will not be able to take this wall and drag it out like a parametric wall. He can't edit the profile of this wall, and that becomes very annoying to the user of other programs. It's fine in Blender, but it's bad for programs which can't support meshes. So if I go new again, and this time I leave this checked. So this is an experimental feature, by the way, which will be available in the next release. And now if I import the same file, you'll see a difference. It looks the same, but if I go under my mesh properties, you will find that there are various vertex groups. It knows that a certain portion of this geometry is actually a parametric extruded area solid. So I can hit select and it says this portion of the geometry is a parametric extrusion. It also understands that it has a profile, and it's a rectangular profile. It's not like a curvaceous profile, a circular profile. It's actually a parametric rectangle down here. And it also understands that it has an extrusion direction. And you can see it's extruded up in the z-axis from here to here. And these will only appear if you have that option enabled. I'm going to leave that option disabled in the release, but it will be there for those of you who are trying to get it to round trip with other programs. That's the feature you want to enable. And what that also does is it checks this box here. This is native. And if it's checked, that means that when you export it, it will retain its parametric information. So hopefully this will work now. We'll try. This is still a work in progress, this feature. No, it's still a work in progress. I'll export just that one wall and try import it again with the native representations turned on. And I've lost my geometry. Yep, I've lost it. So as you can see, it's still something that's a bit of a work in progress, and that's something that will be fixed for the next release. But for certain other applications, it should be retained. So I'll give a brief demonstration with one I think should work. Sorry. So here we have a series of objects, and you can see each one of them has their extrusion, all their parametric information associated. And I can select it all, hit export, and let's call that test. And now, or even let's modify one of them. Just keep things interesting. So that one's longer. Export that. And now if I re-import test, now you can see that the data has been modified, but more importantly, the parametric information is still retained. The extrusion direction has been increased, but the rectangle profile has been maintained. And that means that if I bring back into the original authoring program, in this case it's SiteCAD, it should be still an editable object and not converted into a mesh, which they can't edit, for example.